Hello and welcome back to the Panti Personals. Now, first out in this new season, I was with the very thoughtful and talented Danny Larkin, who is very much a rising star on the Irish music scene. But today, my two guests are brothers who have already soared high and mopped up awards, applause, acclaim, and gained legions of followers. It's Brían and Diarmuid McGlynn, otherwise known to you and me as Ye Vagabonds, whose close harmonies and acoustic instrumentation, marrying trad, folk, and Appalachian blues, has won them audiences across the world. They're Carlow men, but found their voice together as a band in Dublin, in places like the Cobblestone Pub, which of course is under threat today, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit later. But their mother's homeland, Arranmore Island in Donegal, has also shaped them, their songs, their sound, and their story. Brían and Diarmuid, welcome. Lovely to have you.
Thanks a million.
Great to be here.
First of all, I should say that earlier this year, we had the lovely all-round good egg and polymath Myles O'Reilly in. And he has he's sort of played a major role, hasn't he, in the
huge
Vagabonds
absolutely.
story.
Yeah, Myles is Ye Vagabonds' big brother. He just found us at a pivotal point when we weren't taking ourselves too serious. I don't like to say taking seriously, but we weren't going at it full belt, you know?
Weren't really putting ourselves out there, no.
We weren't putting ourselves out there too much. In a way, we weren't taking ourselves seriously. We had a joke band name that we had since we were teenagers.
What was the joke band
The brand new Switcheroo, we used to be called when we were younger, yeah.
I'm glad you changed it.
Yeah, we had to. Well, actually, that was the kind of incentive, was we met Myles, and then we played at the Arbutus area in Body and Soul that Myles runs. So this friend of ours, Stefano, said, Myles, did you get the lads up to play a song? We played a song. And then after that, Myles asked if we wanted him to make a video of us. And then he just...
We did 2 videos, I think, in a day in Walsh's and in our front room in Stony Batter. And then that was when we had to decide, make up a new band name. And then one of the videos did really well.
Yeah.
So if it weren't for Myles, we wouldn't really be a band, I'd say. And we've had a lot of adventures with Myles since then. We've done a lot of videos with him.
Yeah.
We've collaborated closely on things with him, and he's a real close friend.
Yeah. You mentioned Walsh's, which is Walsh's Pub in Stony Batter.
That's right.
Yeah.
Brían, before that point, you were just kind of doing the sessions in Walsh's or the Cobblestone, and it was just fun.
Well, when we were younger, we used to play all over Carlow and places around the Midlands. We were just playing gigs in pubs, playing whatever songs, playing any kind of music. Could be Rolling Stones covers or anything. So we were still doing those gigs, and before we met Myles, we had met a crowd of musicians in Dublin that wrote their own songs and were more interested in doing that as well. So we kind of were starting to develop maybe more in writing our own material, and we found people that we felt like we belonged with, maybe, and that kind of changed things for us too. We hadn't really had a scene our age in Carlow that we kind of bonded with in such a big way,
And then with Myles, Diarmuid, I want to talk to you about the All Boats Rise project you did. Tell me how you got to there, because first of all, you'd done a similar project where you played sort of on islands.
And that was Myles' idea. I suppose Myles has kind of been like the eyes of the band. He does the visual thing, and in that way has presented us to the world and made us accessible to, we were just singing in the corner of a pub effectively, and in a few other places before that. And then Myles made these videos, people saw them, and then Myles had wanted to do kind of a tour of the islands with an artist for years, and then he was kind of like, you guys are the right people for this because of the connection with the islands. And Myles not only filmed those gigs, but also he stepped into this other role that Myles has since continued to do for us, where he dressed the stages, fixed up the lights, and aesthetically just kind of helped create the whole experience,
I courted a wee girl for many's a long day, and I slighted all others that came in my way. And well, she's rewarded me to the last day for she's gone to be wed to another, she's gone to be wed to another.
Well, that was the thing about the island tour that was kind of so transformative for us, was that it felt like we learned to tour all over again, because we were playing in like a community hall on Inishmaan with a basketball hoop on the stage. You know what I mean? You had to kind of learn to transform a space into a venue so that people would walk in and not just feel like they were walking into their local hall, that it felt a bit different. And Myles is amazing at that.
He did this amazing improv job where he took the lights off a snooker table that was in the corner of this community hall, put them up on the stage. It turned out that the plug wasn't working, so he took the fuse out of a plug in the kettle in the same hall, fixed it up, plugged in the lights. They looked amazing. After that, we went and bought a set of snooker table lights that we brought around all the rest of those gigs with us, and it just was one of those things that no one else would have thought of. And
he's amazing.
And how many islands did you do?
6 or 7.
6 or 7 of them, maybe.
And how long was the period of time?
It was a couple of months, maybe from June to like end of July, mid-August kind of time. Yeah.
And so after that, the idea then came about to do an inland version of that, and being from Carlow, that probably made sense too. Because I have to say, looking at the little clips and everything, it seems like, I don't know, almost impossibly idyllic. And to do it during the pandemic, when people were trying to find a way to perform, to be hopping on a barge, and which I have to say, when we were kids, every 2 years we had a family holiday, and it was down the Shannon on a barge. My mother's old friend owned a barge. So I have like great memories of, me and my 6 brothers and sisters, my parents, the cat. We took the cat on the barge, the dog, some neighbours' kids all piled onto these barges.
Did the cat have its own life vest?
No, and like this sounds so nuts. Like taking the dog on the barge is not such a big, people do that. It seems reasonable.
And sometimes have life jackets for them.
And the cat in Lough Forest Park, the cat legged it, one day and was gone for 2 days, but came back and got back on the boat, and we, went home with the cat.
Who knows what the cat got up to on that last weekend?
It's such a nutty idea. And my dad is a fucking vet. And I even said to him, says, we took the cat on a boat holiday.
Cats don't traditionally like water, do they? Cats?
Or leaving home, or any of it. Like the whole thing was such a nuts idea. Anyway, so reading about your inland waterway barge tour, it was just really speaking to me. So
great.
How did it work on a practical level, each gig? And
it was like, I guess the process took a lot longer than just a month on the boat.
Yeah.
But it was something we thought about it a couple of years ago, and then I guess because of the pandemic, we decided that maybe it would be a good time to do it. So we started, I think we basically went on the Grand Canal, the Barrow, and then up the Royal Canal. So the Grand Canal and the Barrow were on the same boat.
Yeah.
And we were told by the people who owned the boat that we shouldn't go down the Barrow first because the Barrow is a bit trickier. There's there's currents and stuff. So we went up the Grand Canal.
You were doing your own.
We had to
driving. That's not the right word.
We had to learn to drive it. All right, yeah. So we had friends with us. Rosie and Dave were with us the first week, and that was amazing. They live on a boat and they know how to move barges around, and they showed us the ropes, literally, I suppose. But we brought it over to Banagher, and then they left, and then it was us out on our own.
But Myles jumped on at that point as well. So then we became this crew of 3.
It was kind of the best thing we've ever done, I'd say.
Easily. So, everything you've said, about it being impossibly idyllic, even though we had put all this effort into planning, but there's always things you can't plan for, like the weather, for example, which was perfect.
Yeah.
It was amazing. The crowds, you don't know what the crowds are going to be like. They were amazing everywhere. And we put out like 30 free tickets on Eventbrite per gig. I think the capacity for gigs outdoors at the time was like 75 or 100.
100 outdoors or something.
And around 100 people turned up, just kind of, word of mouth and stuff every night. So we kind of tried to like keep it to a minimum, and it was just perfect every time. And like, I think we had to cancel one gig
because of the rain.
Because of the rain.
Otherwise.
So you had to sort of advertise these gigs in advance in all these different, towns and villages, whatever. And then you're pulling up, to the pier side or whatever, and you're like just sitting up on the verge in a sense.
Yeah.
It
feels a little bit like the circus is town kind of thing.
Yeah. So in some places we would get there, we'd try get there early enough in the day to set up, and Myles would do his thing. He would kind of like dress the area, and then usually we would be set up well in time before people got there. Sometimes we would be on the barge, like on the roof or on the back, or sometimes we just play on the bank or whatever kind of worked. You have to improvise everywhere you go, and so each one is different. Everything was kind of different. Every single gig was completely different, and
they were all really unique
in their own way.
They were all amazing. Well, probably the first gig that we put on the barge was in Belmount Loch. Yeah, and there's an overhanging galvanized like tin roof that used to be the shelter for when the Guinness barges would pull up.
Yeah.
But it's on the opposite bank. Say the bank that the grassy bank that the audience were going to be able to sit on is on the opposite bank. So we pulled up, we set up the tent on the opposite bank, and then we
were doing. It was literally just the three.
Yeah, we were our own crew. And then we had to reverse the barge, and it was a really weirdly tricky maneuver. We had done plenty of reversing, but the whatever it was about the water level there, it was quite a difficult thing to reverse the barge in under this roof, this shelter, and then set up stage, and then the audience were arriving, and then play, and it was the first one, so there was always teething problems.
It's not straightforward at
not at all straightforward. And it's a gig where like if something falls off the stage, you might never see it again. It's like the
last one we ended up arriving about an hour and a half late. We got delayed by about 5 days at the end of the trip, and we had to wait for water levels to rise, and then it was really low going through Mullingar, so it was coming into the last gig. I know, always Mullingar. But we came through the last stretch. It was incredibly slow and weedy. We were arriving there at 8 o'clock, which is when the gig was supposed to start. Luckily that day the restrictions lifted a bit. There was about 300 people sitting on the bank in Coolnahay Harbour, and we arrived in on the boat, and we were thinking, right, we have to kind of make a scene of this, because we know everybody's going to see us arriving in. We had the PA speakers with us, which are these like giant battery powered speakers, and you can hook up to them via Bluetooth with your phone. So the first thing that Diarmuid had on his phone was Cormac Begley playing O'Neill's March, like, this kind of war-like deep bassy concertina thing. So we stuck it up on the roof and like came into Coolnahay Harbour with Cormac Begley blaring out of a speaker, and then had to park the barge in front of everyone and do the whole thing. It was kind of intense, but kind of brilliant as well, because the whole thing became performance. Like,
very theatrical in the end. Yeah, it was amazing crack. She dances as well as anyone. She wouldn't go to bed unless she had her shimmy on. When she had it on, when she go to bed with anyone. A ring a ding a dum and a ring a ding a daddy o, ring a ding a dum and no act for the daddy o. She had lovers by the score, every Tom and Dick and Harry. She courted night and day, and still she wouldn't marry. Till she fell in love with the fellow with the hammer and tried to run away. She hit him with the hammer with the ring. Yeah, you just and loads of mad things happened on that trip as well, that Myles managed to capture like all of, and that's his genius. He'll always catch it. He'll always catch the funny stuff and the really sweet stuff. We had an owl rescue that we picked up a friend of Brían's, the father of a friend of Brían's, from Carlow. We picked him up by chance along the way, and he said that there was a bird caught in a wire down the way.
You say you picked him up by chance. He was like hanging out on the riverbank, and the
Yeah.
barge goes by, and you
Exactly.
go, I know you. And
Yeah.
That's
We were coming
exactly what happened.
We were coming
yeah.
up through a lock, and I spotted him, and he went over to Myles. Myles was like filming us, and he went over to Myles to ask if we could maybe pull down this bird that he saw that was caught in a tree. And then I spot him, and sure, he just jumped on with us, and then
he ended up performing the rescue and taking
Stripped off
this poor brown owl.
Baby,
Sorry, a brown owl. Yeah, was it a long-eared owl?
baby
It was.
long-eared owl.
Baby long-eared owl down from this fishing wire that it was caught in. We managed to get the owl aboard. It was still alive, untangled all of the wire and wrapped it up in a towel and put it safely inside.
There's a lot of drama, like
A lot of drama.
we had to
yeah.
pull a couple out from under the bridge in Carlow. That we were on the way back to Carlow town. We got a call off the lockkeeper, and I rang him anyway to check in, and he said, "I need yous in Carlow as quickly as you can." And there was a couple that got stuck they went under the wrong arch of the bridge, basically.
There's only
And
one arch that's passable, you know?
Yeah.
So.
And so they got stuck in a different barge. So we ended up having to pull them out. But it's a really intense thing to do. You're going against the current, and then you have to turn, get the rope off the lockkeeper while we're turning, tie it onto our boat, and then drive full throttle towards a weir. Which is like
there's
just
this
over,
shelf that you could go over the edge
Yeah.
of, and you need to drive really fast at it.
It's like this whole other world on the water
Oh,
there.
it's
Get
definitely
you down to Carlow ASAP, stat.
it's definitely like there's a subculture, and
Yeah.
there is definitely a subculture in Ireland of people that live on barges and that kind of deal with the canals, as I'm sure you know from your childhood. But it is really tightly knit, and so everywhere that we went, by the time we were a couple of weeks in, people knew us by the time we got there, and
And you were also the traveling, musicians setting up your gigs. You must have been the talk at the Barrow.
They were. I did hear some old men talking about us in a shop somewhere down on, I don't know where we were. It was in the middle of nowhere. Like
It's amazing the
it's
way
gas.
word travel. You wouldn't know how word gets passed around on the Barrow. We met. There's a man who lives in the lock house at Loughlin Bridge. We've known him for years. He's known affectionately as Bobby the Hippie in Carlow, and he told us that he used to be friends with this heron that used to live with him. When you'd pass by most of the weirs, you'd often see a heron standing on a weir. He told us that he once witnessed the conference of the herons, that they meet and they hold a council. Bobby's a very wise man. A wise,
reliable source.
wise and reliable source. We have no reason to doubt that Bobby witnessed a council among the herons to decide which weir each heron would be allotted to. He told us, and as far as I'm concerned, it's the truth.
Well, I'm willing
So
to
that's
buy it. I'm on board.
The communication networks along the Barrow.
Well, this seems like a very opportune moment to have a song. Tell us what the song you're about to do is.
It's a song that it's called "The Pride of the Barrow," and we went looking for songs that were to do with the canals and barge life for this project, and there's very few of them recorded. But there was a documentary that I found that was made by RTÉ back in the 70s that included recordings of this fella talking. He was telling stories about his life, how he had spent his life working on boats, on the Guinness boats, and so was his father and his father before him. And it sounded to me like he was the one that was singing a few songs in this documentary, but he wasn't named and he wasn't credited. So there was a fragment of a song. I wrote a couple of more verses to it, and then we ended up, by chance, one of the lockkeepers in Carlow, I got chatting to him, and he mentioned a story about his dad. He said his dad used to work on the boats, and I recognised the story from this documentary. I said, your dad, he hardly sings a song called "The Pride of the Barrow," does he? Or like with a fine pair of horses going down to Carlow. He said, yeah. He said, that was my dad's song. I said, and it turns out he's still alive. Jim Gill is his name. He's 90 years old, and so he's one of the old Guinness bargemen. So that's where this song kind of came from. But we'll visit him soon.
It's a very Irish story, that too,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Absolutely.
Everybody knows everybody. All right, let's hear the song.
Right.
My love, he's a bold man, he's handsome and tall. He sails down the Barrow, the neatest of all, with his copper brown hair and his violet blue eyes. He's the pride of the Barrow and my heart's delight. Well, I wish him safe sailing from Lowtown to here, from Graig up to Loughlin by bridges and weirs, from Dublin to Belmount with a 40-ton load, and a fine pair of horses going down to Carlow. By the bridge at Maganey I first met my dear. He was dopping a fly o'er the mouth of the Lear. By the clear running water I spent the whole night, with the pride of the Barrow and my heart's delight. Well, I wish him safe sailing from Lowtown to here, from Graig up to Loughlin by bridges and weirs, from Dublin to Belmount with a 40-ton load, and a fine pair of horses going down to Carlow.
Gorgeous. I have a few thoughts about that song. The first of all is kudos on, I presume, not changing the pronouns. But then you tell me that it was a guy who sang it anyway originally, and he sang it with male pronouns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is interesting to me because most singers are so obsessed and they always, you know, they're so freaked out and they change the pronouns. Yeah. And I was thinking, you're perfectly happy to sing a song where you murder somebody in it and you don't get freaked out, but you can't, you sing something from the perspective of a woman for a second. So that's interesting to me though, because you heard it being sung by a guy from the perspective of a woman.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of common in traditional songs.
I think that's a common thing, and I think we've always kind of enjoyed the fact that you can do that. There's like permission to do that. Yeah. In that whole sphere of to just like I sing a song that begins "I am a poor girl." Yeah. You know, and you can, and it's a long-standing part of the tradition, and there is something a bit fluid about it, and that's like totally cool. Yeah.
Sometimes we do change pronouns of songs, or we add verses that have different, just for the crack.
We've done, well, there's a song called Hares on the Mountain where it's like if all the young men were hares on the mountain, all the young girls would take guns and go hunting. And we've changed in some of the verses, we've mixed it up so that in one of the verses we'll sing all the young men, then all the young men, and then another one where it's all the young girls and all the young girls, just for the crack as you can.
And if all the young maidens were green rushes growing, fall-a-dal-a-dal-a-dal-a-dal-lay, and the very young maid to take up and go on, fall-a-dal-a-dal-a-dal-a-dal-lay.
Because with folk songs you can just,
they're everybody.
Well, I like that because in a way, a folk song, it's a bit like, it's a story and you're just, telling the story.
I suppose it's the thing with folk songs and with old songs is that like it's kind of hard to say that there is an original thing, that it's very hard to trace things back to one source, so it means that there's a lot of freedom to do whatever you want with them in that way. There's no copyright.
Yes. But they're also kind of oral histories in a way that a regular pop song isn't. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, every time you retell the story, whether you intend to embellish it or not, because you're, well, especially if it's in the oral tradition, it may not have been written down. And so you're depending on the reliability of your own memory.
Yeah.
And memory is unreliable.
Yeah.
So you're going to misremember things, and the way that you misremember things are going to be colored by your experience. Yeah. So if you have leanings towards, I don't know, violence, or leanings towards gender fluidity, or whatever it is you want to bring to the story, the things that you prioritize are going to come through. They're going to be the things that you emphasize. Maybe it'll just be in the way that you ornament that verse, the way you sing it.
Yeah.
But whether you like it or not, you definitely, you'll end up affecting things, I think, subconsciously or consciously.
Yeah. And, imitation in traditional singing is actually an act of, it's an act of creation, you know.
Although I have to say that there's a part of me that I couldn't stop sniggering, because there's somehow the 40-ton load and the fucking is just like, I was like, oh, it was a long pandemic. Anyway,
that's another perspective that'll be in the back of my mind anyway. From now on.
Let us quickly rush through that and bring it back to your grandfather. Because Brían, you do have this lovely story. What age are you now, Brían?
Nearly 28.
28. So when you were 16, doing your transition year, you did your placement in the Traditional Music Archive, and so tell the lovely story about discovering recordings of your granddad.
Yeah, it was about, I was actually with Grace Toland, who I think you interviewed a couple of years ago. We were with Grace a couple of days ago and talking about this. I was in, for a week, and one day I was sent into a room to sort through leaflets into different boxes. A really important job, of course. And I was sorting away, and there was a woman in the room that was using it as an office. I knew she was finishing work that her husband had done for his life as a collector of old music. So we got chatting, and she kind of was asking me questions about my interest in music and why I was there, and if there was music in my family. And anyway, I told her our mom sings a few songs, our dad sings a few songs, the whole family sing, whenever they get the chance. And she said, okay, so did your grandparents sing? Where did they get this? Where did your parents get the songs from? And so I said, well, my granddad had a few, he sung a few songs. Yeah, I think he was a bit of a singer. And this woman, Lisa.
But now you had never heard your grandfather?
No, I'd never met him. He died back in the 80s, but so I'd never heard him. And she said, what's your granddad's name? I said, he wasn't well known, but he was known locally as Barney Begg. And she said, that's hardly Barney Begg Gallagher from Arranmore. And I said, yeah, that's my granddad. Yeah. I said, I never knew him, but yeah. And she said, I recorded him back in the 70s with Hugh. So I said, well, that's amazing. I've never heard him singing at all. I've never heard recordings of him. I'd love to hear them sometime. And she said, well, they're all here. We can go listen to them right now. Let's go find them. And we kind of excitedly ran upstairs and found the CDs that they were on. And then I was given a set of headphones and a computer and stuck on this thing. And there was 5 recordings of my granddad singing, and a few recordings of our great grandmother, his mother. The recordings were amazingly alive. You could hear at one point somebody walked into the room, probably the front door of the house, and they start saying huh, and then you hear somebody saying shh, and then the kettle going on, and it's an amazingly real thing.
Viaki krunjen bralachasi maravdur. I come shang shinchegan karugan smal nalu. Sweet mishes near wada the hirari me. Kaje murahan in jismash nan koraile. Or dawan be wagams gavi lebo gadorin dan nanyer waller charco plaboy.
I mean, that was a crazy moment. It was kind of transformative for me because I was singing whatever songs back then, you know, David Bowie and like Johnny Cash songs out of songbooks. I hadn't really been that interested in traditional singing up to that point. I learned a few songs, but I didn't really feel like they belonged to me. Maybe I didn't feel like I had a place to sing those songs, but it definitely maybe made me feel like maybe those songs did belong to me. Maybe I you know, had a place to sing those songs. And then the more I thought about it and looked into it over the past few years, I guess the more that I realized that a lot of songs are traditional songs that people wouldn't even realize, you know.
Yeah.
So just somebody's party piece. You never really question, but
and I wonder as well, like, we didn't know that there were recordings of our grandfather there in the archive. We kind of knew he was a singer, he had a few songs, but like, how many people had, you know, their grandparents or like granduncles or aunts or whatever, how many of them were like singing songs that would have been, now if you listen to them you'd say they were traditional songs, but at the time they were just songs that people sang. So like, those songs, therefore, really, I mean, traditional songs, they can belong to anyone. You don't have to have a granddad who sang songs or a granny who sang trad songs either. It's just, you can just feel like you have a sense of connection to them for whatever reason, you know.
I mean, it's not like you grew up in a family that was like one of these steeped in trad, all performers, you know, musicians. It was a more of a casual. Oh, my granddad, I think, sang a few songs.
Yeah, totally.
Your ma,
you
know,
like our dad. When family get-togethers, our dad would sing like Leonard Cohen, Cat Stevens, Simon and Garfunkel, like, and there were songs that our family sang that were like traditional, but they were in the middle of all those other songs. You'd play them with an acoustic guitar. So like, there's songs that we sang together we didn't know were traditional. They were our sort of family songs. Yeah,
I think every family, whether they're even musical or not, has some songs that totally, I know, one's a few drinks or you're on a long car drive or whatever.
Totally. But no, we're definitely not one of those families that are like, you know, shan notes through.
I'm really
and through.
glad you brought that up, because I think maybe it's something that people like to imagine about us at this stage. That story maybe gets told, but it's I mean, we grew up listening to like Led Zeppelin and Thin Lizzy first, in a way. There was a route that we followed, a musical interest that took us to getting really interested in traditional music and spending time. I mean,
it's not like, you know, you were 2 years old and your parents are shoving a fiddle into your hands or anything.
No. Not at all, no. Like, the girls all played like trad instruments, but our parents didn't play trad tunes.
Brían, they had an interest. They were really interested.
They liked it, but they
one
were
of their friends, like, they were into like amateur theatre and stuff.
Theatre. They're the kind of people, they encouraged anything that was creative. They loved things that were like community based. So like, our dad was involved in the GAA, even though he didn't really play a whole lot. You know, he was involved in the club because it was a club and it was a local thing.
Yeah,
you know,
that is small town stuff.
Totally,
you're just involved in everything.
And one of their friends, Dave Sheridan, when I was like 8 or something, asked my mum if I wanted to learn the fiddle, and there was a fiddle lying around somewhere that my sister had when she was younger. So I ended up learning when I was that age, probably from Dave. But
I didn't learn any trad tune. Like, I started playing tunes only a few years ago, really, and singing traditional songs like when we were in our late teens, early 20s, and like, like, kind of followed a path through loads of other music to get there, and in a way it does feel like coming back home. But there is this idea people have about, like, I'm doing the rabbit ears quotey thing here for people who aren't looking at us, but like, authenticity. What I think authenticity is a feeling people have inside themselves when they see or hear something that, you know, feels like it's true to the old whatever or the real, you know. Like, we became obsessed with the music we were into, but I don't know.
I mean, if you look at the bare bones of your story, you know, what would jump out, you know, from a sort of trad, they were bound to, is the fact that your mother's from Arranmore, and, you know, and you spent summers there and all. But when you were a kid and you're going to the island in the summer, were you just being kids, whoops, poking a stick in a rock pool or whatever?
Absolutely.
Like,
Yeah.
it wasn't like you were being taken to the trad session every night. And
There isn't really that on Arranmore anyway as such, or there wasn't when we were kids. Like there are lots of pubs and there's loads of singing, and there are great singers there, and there's a pipe band, and there's music, all right, but there isn't like a regular trad. It isn't that kind of a place.
Our uncle
really,
used
anyway.
to play in a pub, and he was like the local one-man band, had a like drum machine and stuff.
And it would have been kind of country
like,
music and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But no, we were up there playing games. It was in a it was Lord of the Rings land for me when I was a kid.
All the cousins together. It was kind of that.
How big
that
is the island? I mean, how many people are on
It's
it?
about 400.
Oh,
it's populated enough.
big.
Back then, like when we were kids, there was over 1,000 people living there all the time. So the population has dropped quite significantly in the past kind of 15 years, 20 years, because of fishing and stuff getting kind of hit.
Yeah. Although the population is dropping, but your family is adding to it because your parents and sister have
moved back.
There?
Yeah,
That's right,
and then
yeah.
Fiona and Jessie have 3 little girls there now as well. So it's keeping, I mean, every time that happens, I mean, it keeps the primary schools going and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it was very exciting for the island when our youngest niece was born, because she was the first kid to be born on the island in a couple of years, so it was a big deal. But it really feels like home up there now. Like our mum and dad left Carlow after we left. I suppose we're the youngest.
And so when did your parents move back there?
It was about 4 or 5 years ago.
So like now Christmas is coming up. Will that be Christmas on an island?
Yeah, it's become the hub now. We don't have a place in Carlow anymore, so like we don't visit Carlow as much now.
No. Yeah, the first time we were in Carlow in years was on the boat. So we'd be up to the island a lot. Like we'd be kind of, and I spent a few months there last year during the second lockdown, and it feels like home. We do feel like rooted in the place a wee bit. It's nice.
And because of the family connection, you're not considered blow-ins, is it?
Yeah. There's a book on the history of the island, sort of, that's called Arranmore Links, that our great grandmother was the primary source for. Our granddad sat down and wrote down her recollection, and she was one of these people who had like, the
memory,
the art of tracing and all this. She was the memory on the island, and she could trace family trees back several generations and knew who married who and all this stuff. So she became the source of this. There's a whole book that is basically her memory of the area, and so we can see our family and stories about our family and even little details. Like there's a story. Her name was
Biddy Naily.
Biddy
Naily O'Gallagher. So she was born 1888. She died in the 80s. Like she lived till she was 97. Outlived her son, her only son. She was kind of had an incredible and brutal life in a way, but like she was an amazing woman, just like a really powerful matriarch of the family, and lived with her mom and in that house for her whole life.
There's a really beautiful and I think unique recitation as well recorded of her in that same Hugh Shields collection that our granddad was in. So we can hear her voice now. We could hear his voice. She's reciting a kind of a rare local like religious recitation in like a very pure dialect. But so we know things about, because of her memory and because of that book and those recollections, we know things about our family going back, I don't know, 6 generations or something.
Yeah, there's on
the island.
There was a kind of in the past few years, I guess, when we got interested in traditional songs and kind of looking for them wherever we were, we then realised that a couple of old family friends were really amazing singers and had really important songs that nobody else had, and songs that weren't really recorded or paid attention to, and they never regarded themselves as traditional singers. And that's quite common for people not to think of themselves as traditional singers. They just sang songs, and it turned out that there were 2 people who have sadly passed away in the past couple of years, but Andrew and Madge both had spent a lot of time with this singer called Rasha Rua on Arranmore when they were kids.
I'm going to sing a song now. This is a song I got from Rasha Rua when I was 15 years of age. I learned this song, and it's My dear mother stood on the Queen's town dock with a handkerchief up to her eyes. And as the big ship sailed away with the tide, it was there that she started to cry.
And Rasha would have been of the same generation as our great grandmother. And she had an amazing repertoire of old songs and singing. And yeah, she was recorded a bit by the Folklore Commission and RTÉ back in the 50s, but they went looking for her local Irish language old songs, and they didn't bother recording a bunch of her other songs because they thought, oh, maybe that one's a bit modern. That doesn't sound traditional. But Madge and Andrew had loads of those songs. And so we've kind of gotten to learn a bunch of those through them, and we became really close to Andrew in recent years then. So it kind of gave us a couple of ways in, and identity's a funny thing in those places. If people don't identify as a singer, they don't feel like they can say that they're a traditional singer. Their confidence might be low or whatever. They won't tell anyone.
Well, I think people feel they have to earn singer, or it has to be done professionally or something, rather than... I'm interested that you said the recording of your grandmother, Diarmuid, you said was a local religious recitation.
I think
this
so.
Is making it sound very Wicker Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never seen Wicker Man, actually. People keep on saying that there's
we should probably watch that.
We should probably watch it. We're probably
reference.
like, yeah, people keep on...
Not the modern remake about 10 years
No,
ago.
the old one.
The original one.
Because I think the original one has a song in it that has the same melody as Willie O'Winsbury, so people used to keep on hearing us and being like, have you seen The Wicker Man?
Says bring me Willie O'Winsbury, for hanged he shall be. But when he came the king before, he was clad all in red silk.
But no, I get it's Spooky Island.
Yes, Spooky Island, religious
stuff.
Cut off
Yeah.
from the mainland, terrible things happen.
Yeah. I don't know that
Sounds about right.
I don't know that our great grandmother ever got up to that kind of thing, to be honest. No, it's like it has a lovely word in it though. That recitation, I think it's Suilke for miracle. The word for miracle.
Het zweltje dat weer zie wanneer hen wa kuisel, gerogua steen se gro. Spanin chen wa koog. Agus dan a zweltje dat weer zie dan hen wa kuisel, gehuil chale hen rood.
Because it's about the 7 miracles, like folk religion. Folk religion often has, I don't know, they could have pagan origins, but they'll often have these things. They're not from the kind of Catholic, faith. So there's this story of like the 7 miracles of the Virgin Mary, and like it's a folk poem. There's some real beautiful stuff in some of these old poems because they were just written by people. And often, like
people who didn't actually write, maybe, so they were oral.
Exactly, composed rather, maybe by people who knew stories that were folk stories, and often kind of carry a different message than the mainstream church message.
Yes,
and especially ones around the Virgin Mary often have something to do with like something. A bit different, just it's a feminine thing,
fertility, and all that stuff.
But they're not even always fertility. Sometimes they're just like a very female kind of protective power as well.
It would be only pretty recently that there'd be like a lot of men around all year round on Arranmore. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
Like forever, people have just been emigrating seasonally or for years. So yeah, it was often the way that it would just be like women and children on Arranmore, for until a certain time of the year would come around, like Christmas or something or whatever, and all the husbands would come home.
So therefore women would have been doing all of the work and would have been like really strong as well. They would have been doing like all of the farm or that same great grandmother would have rowed to the mainland and back herself
like every day,
well into her old age,
Well, women in the West, they're fierce.
And the Northwest as well, even maybe.
You were mentioning the songs that you'd learned, like songs that you're doing, or
some of them, some of them.
Example.
Well, There's one, I'm A Rover is one that our mum sings that we didn't really cop as being a traditional song for years because it was just a family activity, more or less. But there's a couple of songs. There's one called No One to Welcome Me Home that I was used to hearing Andrew singing. Maybe because you'd hear people singing them with a guitar in a pub and they'd be backing it like a country song.
Yeah.
Country music is kind of like a first cousin of traditional music. And so, a lot of these songs maybe just sounded like country songs until you kind of listen a bit harder or you find out where they came from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, actually now, this might be a good time then to hear I'm A Rover.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, so let's hear it.
Great.
I must away now, I cannot tardy. This morning's tempest I have to cross. I will be guided without a stumble into the arms that I love the most. I'm a rover, seldom sober. I'm a rover of high degree. It's when I'm drinking, I'm always thinking how to gain my love's company. At last he came to his true love's dwelling. He sat him down there upon a stone, and through her window he whispered softly, is my true lover within the tone? I'm a rover, seldom sober. I'm a rover of high degree. It's when I'm drinking, I'm always thinking how to gain my love's company. She raised her head then from off her pillow. She raised the blanket from off her breast, and through her window she whispered softly, who is disturbing me from my night's rest? I'm a rover, seldom sober. I'm a rover of high degree. It's when I'm drinking, I'm always thinking how to gain my love's company. Get up now, it's your true lover. Get up now and let me in. For I am weary of my long journey, and I am wet right into the skin. I'm a rover, seldom sober. I'm a rover of high degree. It's when I'm drinking, I'm always thinking how to gain my love's company. She raised her head then from off her pillow. She raised the set and she let him in, and they were locked in each other's arms until the long night was past and gone. I'm a rover, seldom sober. I'm a rover of high degree. It's when I'm drinking, I'm always thinking how to gain my love's company. I'm a rover, seldom sober. I'm a rover of high degree. It's when I'm drinking, I'm always thinking how to gain my love's company. I'm a rover, seldom sober. I'm a rover of high degree. It's when I'm drinking, I'm always thinking how to gain my love's company.
Gorgeous. Beautiful.
Thanks.
I want to, after all that talk about Arranmore and inland riverways, I want to talk to something closer to where we are here, because you do have this association with the cobblestone, and which people are probably aware is sort of under threat at the moment. For people who might be listening from wherever, Cobblestone is a very well-known pub in a particular part of Dublin city centre, which is very well known for the sessions and traditional music and music in general, and it's sort of in danger from development at the moment. And it's been interesting to watch because I think during the pandemic, maybe especially, people really kind of took stock of the city and what is not working or what is maybe seemed to be going wrong with it, and maybe also too things that are right with it. And one of the things that has been sort of bubbling up over the last couple of years, and especially during the pandemic, about the city is the loss of our cultural spaces. And when the Cobblestone was threatened by development recently, it really seemed to catch the wave of that fear or that concern. And so there's been this great sort of very enthusiastically supported campaign to save the Cobblestone from development. So tell me, first of all, you guys, came to Dublin separately, right? And then it's here in Dublin rather than on Arranmore or in Carlow that you both sort of started to find music together.
Well, we had been playing together for a little while before we came up to Dublin. But even before we came up to Dublin, we were always really aware of the Cobblestone as a place. And so when we moved up first, we actually moved to a place just down North King Street purely because we wanted to be as near as possible to the Cobblestone. And that's and we've more or less, like, I still live in Dublin. Brían has only recently moved down to Wicklow, but I've more or less moved in a circle orbiting the Cobblestone.
So did I until very
recently. And then Walsh's kind of came later as a kind of an offshoot of that, because we wanted to have a session that was a little bit less traditional. But the Cobblestone is definitely where we found our way really into, like, before we were playing gigs, we were playing, I guess, broadly speaking, folk music, but a lot of it could have been like American folk music because it had nice harmonies. So we were singing kind of old time songs, old time American stuff.
Like there was a little bit of a maybe Republican vibe. If you in Carlow, that maybe if you sang ballads, in inverted commas, people would think
rebel songs, maybe, or and there just wasn't a huge amount of singing of traditional songs in Carlow. There's a couple of people who sing traditional songs, but it's not a big thing in Carlow, and it didn't seem like, if there was any scene, it didn't seem relevant, or it didn't seem like it was going to work for us. And there isn't a whole lot of traditional singing in harmony anyway, so that also just didn't occur to us, because we were trying to do stuff with harmonies. We arrived to Dublin, and I think the big game changer was this singing session called The Night Before Larry Got Stretched, which happens in the back room of the Cobblestone, which is specifically the part of the Cobblestone that's especially under threat at the moment. So we arrived in, and we had met one or two of the people at this session before, so we knew a few of the people, but other than that, this was a really new experience to us. We were in this room with a lot of young people, like, who...
About 60 people maybe would be in at Larry most of the time, 50, 60 people. Yeah.
And there were like a good number of people our age who seemed like they were cool sound people who we'd want to hang out with.
Yeah, some of them looked like us, some of them looked like punks, some of them looked like they were in NCAD. It was a pretty...
bit of a mix, and then there was also a lot of older people, and it was a really intergenerational gathering, and the quality of singing was amazing. I remember like being just really shocked and intimidated in a good way, kind of almost, where I was like, wow, I've got to like step up my game here. I was like hearing these amazing singers, and I was like, geez, that's cool. I want to be doing that. I was hearing like, people singing with really nice ornamentation, or just singing straight and doing it really well, or whatever it was, hearing these songs that it was powerful.
You could hear a pin drop in the room, it's unamplified. It's just people sitting around taking turns singing, and it's kind of powerful.
Extremely welcoming community. I think I went to that session a couple of times before I was ever brave enough to sing at it, and for many years, even maybe still, it's one of the places where I'm almost most nervous to sing, because you're in a room of people who really care about songs.
They hang on every word, and they're not going to miss anything,
They really know the songs, but at the same time are so supportive. So it is just, it's it's the place where, you know, that's the fertile ground for that kind of thing to take off, you know?
Like the people that we met, they ended up being the people who were in like Lankham, Skipper's Alley, Landless, John Francis Flynn, Niamh Burry, Alan Woods, like all these people who are like, and it's now like a scene in inverted commas that people are referring to, but that was really where we met everybody and made friends with everyone, you know? Lisa O'Neill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you could equally bump into Christy Moore there, just like in a woolly hat sitting in the corner.
It's funny, I was about the Cobblestone, the quality of the music is inversely proportional to the quality of the toilet.
That's probably a rule in general.
It's like the opposite to the restaurant rule, where like if the toilet's dirty, the kitchen will be dirty, don't eat there. You know, if you go in and the toilet's immaculate, you're like, I don't want to listen to the tunes here, guys, let's go.
But now one thing though, so because I mean you described that beautifully there, arriving on the Cobblestone and, you know, almost feeling intimidated. But I imagine that there's a kind of a buffer that you create in just being brothers, that you're not sitting in the Cobblestone necessarily entirely alone. I'm using the Cobblestone more metaphorically now at this point, but you know what I mean? And when you're out and about in the world and, you know, trying to carve a niche for yourself, you have, you know, each other.
We were definitely referred to as the lads or the brothers, even if it's just one of us on our own a lot.
Yeah, you do. You become a plural entity.
Yeah.
You lose a bit of your individuality, and it is both a like a nice thing and kind of a frustrating thing sometimes. But like, because you know, you people don't necessarily know you,
and it's more than just in your mind. There is a special quality of hearing siblings' voices a blend.
Oh yeah.
And look at the Nolans.
No, it's true. Yeah, no, it's a classic thing, and people call it blood harmony and stuff. Yeah. And that was kind of an interesting discovery for us when we made it, because there is a bit of an age gap. You know, there's 4.5 years. We didn't hang out when we were kids, really. You know, like when we were like, or teenagers especially. We hung out when we were little kids, and then you know, it becomes uncool to be hanging around with your little younger brother. Then for a couple of years,
and when
you
you're
want
16 or 12, 4 years seems massive.
It's huge, But then when Brían was 16 and I was 20 or that thereabouts, then suddenly we realised we had loads in common. And around that time, our sister asked us actually to sing a song at her wedding, and there was harmony. That was the first time we'd ever sung together, and we kind of, you know, we were immediately like, yeah, this is all cool. Right. Yeah.
And how does the division of labour work when you're making music together?
It changes all the time. I mean, we've just finished making another album. It's kind of being mixed right now. But like this album is one that we definitely wrote together. Like we came together a few times. We each had songs that we had written that we brought to the table. We each had songs that we had found and kind of worked on as well. So it gets divided up kind of differently every time.
Yeah, every time. There was a time when we were younger, we went through a phase where like one of us would have been writing more songs, but the other one would have been arranging traditional songs more. And then there's also been times when, you know, one would write a song, the other one would end up kind of developing it and bringing it to the place where it's.
I think that's one of the cool. That's kind of an interesting thing. Like for me, I find that really fun. If Diarmuid comes to me with a song, maybe sometimes I'll sing the song back to him immediately, just so that he can hear the way that I'm hearing him sing it. Because for me, sometimes if I've written a song, it can be hard to feel confident in it just off the bat, you know. In a way, singing traditional songs helps. The fact that we've done that so much. We're used to just singing words that we're not that attached to in the same way, or we're not insecure about. So you can come at it with the same approach sometimes, where you write something and then treat it as if you found it, and then make it better, and you know, share it with somebody else and work on it like that. It can be a good. It has been.
I think it took us like a while. I think we have put work into getting better at working together, and that like collaborating, because it's a scale of its own, and You know, you could draw bits of advice from various different places. We've read various books, and we've, you know, I suppose, learned tricks from other kinds of projects we've been involved in, and there's little bits of improv tricks that you throw in there, and there's other things that are useful, you know. It's hard though. It's really hard to, like, you know, the most important thing when you're collaborating with someone creatively is that neither of you ever says no or shuts something down. You can't.
I love that you've gone to improv tricks and read books about collaboration and all that.
Totally.
I'm
Yeah,
getting big nerds off you, which I like.
Yes, absolutely. Nerds are my favorite people as well. 'Cause
Yeah,
it's just
definitely.
people who are like unashamedly interested in things.
Yeah.
And you know, go deep.
Well, in one of my perfect, beautiful segues, this would seem like a good time to hear a song that you wrote together.
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this
And
is
what's
a,
the song?
you want to talk about it?
Yeah. It's called Go Away and Come Back Hither, and it had been an idea floating around in the kind of the ether for like a bit of a melody and a few words for a couple of years, and then it took this last 2 years and the experiences of the last 2 years and just what that did to us for this to turn into a song, to come together. And it's about something everyone experiences of, you know, the part of every kind of relationship of, you know, you have to experience separation and coming back together, and sometimes it's almost like a necessary flux in any sort of loving relationship. The song then ends up being kind of shaped around a romantic relationship, and there's a little bit of folklore in one of the verses that I kind of got a bit of inspiration from my wife's background, because she was telling me about this idea of
Your wife's background. Your wife is from Syria. Is that right?
yeah, she's born in Damascus. She grew up in the States, but she was talking about this idea that they have in Islam, where if you're, you know, if you have a romantic connection with someone, or even a really strong friendship or, you know, special type of connection with someone,
Soul friend.
a soul connection with someone, that your souls knew each other before birth. And so there's this line in there about meeting before creation. We bring in a bit of that, but the idea is the go away and come back hither, the going away and the coming back together. And yeah, that creates something, I think.
Guess we've all felt it in the past couple of years.
And it creates a tension and a longing that is, it can be as strong as the feelings of love, or it can strengthen the feelings of love in a way that we have for people that we miss. And it can also be relevant to people who go away in a way that maybe they don't come back physically. And yeah, it's a bit of that too.
Yeah, let's hear it then.
Go away and come back hither, love. Cast it out and draw it back. The very one you long for is the only one you like. All love is just a fairy tale, and fairy tales all true. We met before creation, when light and life were new. Go away and come back hither, love. Cast it out and draw it back. The very one you long for is the only one you like. The poison in the apple, love, when happy hours are brief. If if we never felt it stinging, we'd never know relief. Go away and come back here, love. Cast it out and draw it back. The very one you long for is the only one you lack. The greater part of any love lies somewhere out of sight. Astronomers attending to the paths of distant lights. Go away and come back hither, love. Cast it out and draw it back. The very one you long for is the only one you lack. Go away and come back here, love. Cast it out and draw it back. The very one you long for is the only one you lack. Go away and come back hither, love. Cast it out and draw it back. The very one you long for is the only one you lack.
Gorgeous.
Thanks.
Very talented nerds. That's what you thought. Diarmuid, you just sort of briefly mentioned your lovely missus, and you two are still living deep in the heart of Hipsterville, Stony Batter. Is
Exactly.
that right? Yes.
Yeah. I've got the beard.
You've got the trucker cap.
Yeah, I drink a lot of flat whites. I can't afford to buy my own house.
Yeah. Listen, this idea that flat white is a hipster thing bothers me because when we were kids, that's what milky coffee is. What we always, that's what you got. That's what
Totally. I also think like the idea of hipster is kind of a construct to shame young people or something, and it's been used by politicians, by journalists to basically create this imaginary idea in people's minds that young people are the reason that they can't afford housing now, which is such...
I can't believe I spent 200 grand on avocado on toast,
Yeah, and you read
I'm such an idiot.
What is people's problem with someone who wears a woolly hat? What?
Spoken like a proper nerd hipster.
Yeah.
Although in fairness, if your flat white is made from oat milk, you deserve to never live in a house.
I'll admit to that one. Yeah, absolutely. It's a tastier flat white.
But now, Brían, you abandoned the epicenter of Irish hipsterdom to move to Wicklow.
Yeah,
with your missus in tow.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah, just about a year ago. Yeah, kind of a pandemic move.
I was about to ask you about that. Was it sort of pandemic-y related?
Yeah, it was definitely. Yeah, we were kind of just stuck in a room in Phibsborough, and it was great, and we loved who we lived with and where we lived and everything. But you do feel. I was just starting to feel a bit closed in by walls, especially during the 2 kilometre radius kind of time.
Yeah.
So then this house popped up right up the road from my partner's from Newtown Mount Kennedy, so North Wicklow. So yeah, it's great. I like being down there, but I don't know, I might make it back to Dublin at some point. I'm not sure if we'll stay there or not, but
because I have the small town boy thing, and I think if you're from a small town, either you want to be that, or you absolutely do not. And I am like Dublin 1, slap in the middle of it. I don't even want to see a leaf. I want to just be surrounded by concrete and dog shit.
Yeah, well, it's just it's constant action, isn't there?
Yeah.
Like there's so much going on in the city all the time.
But I also just want to very briefly bring up something else that I sort of struck me when reading about you guys, is your kind of wariness of the Irish thing, and especially if you're in the kind of trad milieu and everything, which I so identify with, because there was a time when if I saw St. Patrick's Day something, I would run screaming in the other direction, because I felt absolutely excluded from that idea of Irishness, which felt so weirdly plastic to me, but also it didn't want me anyway. That's how I used to feel about it,
Yeah. That's why we don't like it. That's what we don't like about it. I mean, there's times when we've benefited from people's maybe fantasies about Ireland. And we can't pretend that we haven't, Like if we go over to America, there's a lot of Irish Americans who are going to have fantasies about Ireland that they project onto us, and that's grand. But what we don't like is what you've just identified, is when it's an exclusive thing. Yeah. And sometimes it's those same Irish Americans, if it's or sometimes it's our own homegrown brand of mean people who basically think that, who are gatekeepers, who think that they can tell other people what Irishness is not. Yeah. And I think we've done a lot to change that as a country in lots of ways, in lots of really positive ways,
I agree,
in the last number of years. But there's lots of things we still don't necessarily want to be associated with.
No. Yeah.
Well, because I'm often accused of being like a gay rights activist, but I always say that was never the way I saw it. And my project, if I had one, used to always be about expanding the definition of Irishness.
Oh, yeah.
To make it a concept that was more elastic. To be able to stretch comfortably around someone like me, because when I was younger, I felt absolutely excluded from the concept of Irishness, because I didn't tick all the right boxes.
I think that's like one of the most beautiful things about queerness in general, actually, is like that it can apply to so much more than sexuality, and it doesn't have to be about gay rights or anything. It can actually just be about like color and like kind of performativeness, or just, as you said, like just expanding the definitions and throwing the doors open to all kinds of things that, sometimes shock value is really great too, because you can totally shock people into a situation where they're like, what, the world can be like this? And then, they might be like outraged for a second, and then they're like, oh, okay. And
people have the most fun of their lives when they're also slightly outraged.
Yeah,
it's a great state,
There's a value to a little bit of discomfort at times if it's done right, and that's a skill that like I think you've probably developed throughout your career, and it's tricky. It's not something that like we necessarily try to incorporate in what we're doing, not in our music. Maybe sometimes in our stage banter a little bit, but like challenge a few things here and there gently. But I really admire that when people do that. I really admire it as a thing, as a type of work to do. Yeah.
Well, speaking of to do, what's next? For the most adorable nerds in the traditional music industry.
Nobody else has really ever honed in as much on the nerd thing, and it's so spot
like
on. No, it's really spot on, actually.
Well, I'm going to be. Well, we're finishing mixing an album.
I'm going to start writing my science fiction novel.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to be categorizing my butterfly collection when I go home.
We're finishing an album, and we're playing a gig in the National Concert Hall on
the 28th. It's on the 28th of November, so it's the end of the month. Yeah.
Yes.
I think this is going out quite soon.
there's probably very few tickets left for that. I know how popular you nerds are. I will look forward to it. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having us in.
Thoroughly enjoyed having the chats, and good luck with everything. And we're out. Thanks a million.
Cool, that was great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Haven't done a lot of haven't done any of this kind of thing at all.
Well, actually, I was laughing because yes, Helen and John here, do all that background research, and then I do actually look at it and read it. And so I'm watching this fairly painful interview with you guys that's done in French with these, with these translators.
Oh my god!
And then later something else I'm reading, and you describe your worst ever gig, and you start, and I'm like, that is